The snow fell hard that January afternoon in 1884, coating the Montana landscape in a thick white blanket that threatened to bury everything in sight. And Amelia Garrison knew she had maybe an hour of daylight left to gather enough firewood to keep her small cabin warm through the night. Her father had died 3 months ago from pneumonia, leaving her alone on their modest homestead just outside the mining town of Butte, and winter had come early and harsh this year, testing everything she thought she knew about survival. The wind cut through her worn wool coat as she bent to pick up another fallen branch, her fingers already numb despite the thick gloves she wore, and she wondered for the 100th time if she should have accepted her aunt's offer to move to Denver instead of stubbornly insisting she could manage the land by herself. She was 20 years old and had lived in Montana her entire life, but nothing had prepared her for the loneliness of these past months. Her mother had passed when Amelia was just 12, and her father had raised her with a firm hand and practical wisdom, teaching her to shoot, to track, to read the weather and the land. But he had also sheltered her in ways she only now understood, handling the heavier work, making the trips into town when the snow got deep, chopping enough wood to last them through the worst storms. Now that responsibility fell entirely on her shoulders, and some days the weight of it threatened to crush her. The pile of branches she had collected sat a few yards away, wrapped with a length of old rope she had brought for bundling. It was not nearly enough for the night, but her back ached and her hands felt like ice, and she debated whether to make one more trip further into the tree line or settle for what she had and ration her use of the stove. The decision was made for her when she heard the unmistakable sound of a horse approaching through the snow, and she straightened, one hand instinctively moving to the rifle she always carried when she ventured away from the cabin. The rider appeared through the falling snow like a ghost materializing from the white void, and as he drew closer, Amelia could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle on a sturdy bay horse, wearing a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat that kept most of the snow off his face. A red bandana covered his nose and mouth against the cold, but she could see his eyes, a striking blue-gray that seemed to assess her situation in a single sweeping glance. He pulled his horse to a stop about 10 feet away, giving her space, and slowly lowered the bandana to speak. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough from the cold. "That is a long way to carry firewood in this weather." Amelia kept her hand near her rifle but tried to appear calm. Strange men on isolated homesteads could mean trouble, though something about this one did not immediately set off her internal alarms. "I can manage," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "Been doing it for months now." He nodded slowly, his gaze moving from her to the pile of wood and then to the distant outline of her cabin, barely visible through the snow. "Not doubting that, miss, but managing and doing it the hard way are two different things. Name is Benjamin Edwards. I work at the Copper King mine, got a claim of my own about 3 miles north of here. Been riding past this property for weeks now, seen you out here working." "And you just decided today to stop?" Amelia asked, wary. She had heard plenty of stories about men who took advantage of women living alone, who saw isolation as opportunity. Benjamin seemed to read her thoughts because he held up both hands, showing they were empty. "Just thought you might appreciate some help before the snow gets worse. Storm coming in looks like it will be a big one, and that wood you have there would not last more than a few hours." He paused, then added, "Lost my own father 2 years back. Watched my mother try to handle everything alone before my brother, and I could convince her to let us help." Recognized that particular brand of stubborn independence. Despite herself, Amelia felt some of her defensiveness ease, There was something genuine in his voice, a shared understanding of grief and necessity. She glanced at the wood pile again and made a decision. "Cabin is about a quarter-mile that way," she said, pointing. "If you are offering to help carry this load, I would not say no, but that is all." "Yes, miss," Benjamin said, already dismounting. He was tall, she noticed, probably 6 feet or a bit more, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean muscle that came from hard physical labor. As he came closer, she could see he was probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed a trim and a few days' worth of stubble on his strong jaw. His face was weathered but handsome in a rough-hewn way, and when he smiled slightly, she saw the lines around his eyes that suggested he did it often. He gathered up the bundled wood with an ease that made her months of struggle feel even more pronounced, hefting it over one shoulder while taking his horse's reins in the other hand. "Lead the way," he said simply. They walked in silence through the falling snow, Amelia in front with her rifle, Benjamin following with the wood and his horse. The wind had picked up, driving the snow nearly horizontal at times, and Amelia had to squint to keep her bearings. She heard Benjamin breathing steadily behind her, his boots crunching in the snow, and found herself oddly comforted by the presence of another person after so many weeks of solitude. When the cabin came into view, she felt the familiar mix of pride and sadness she always experienced seeing it. Her father had built it with his own hands, solid logs chinked with mud and moss, a stone chimney that drew well, windows with real glass he had hauled all the way from Butte. It was small but sturdy, meant to withstand the harsh Montana winters, and it had been home her entire life. Now it felt too big and too empty all at once. "Nice construction," Benjamin said as they reached the front porch. "Your father built this." "He did," Amelia said, shouldering open the door. "Took him 2 summers, but he did not cut any corners." Benjamin followed her inside, stomping the snow from his boots before crossing the threshold. The interior was dim and cold, the fire in the stove having burned down to embers during her absence. He set the wood down near the stove and looked around, taking in the neatly kept main room with its simple furniture, the curtain that divided off the sleeping area, the shelves lined with preserves and supplies. "You have been doing a good job keeping the place up," he observed. "That is not easy in winter." Amelia moved to the stove, opening it and beginning to rebuild the fire with some of the wood Benjamin had brought in. "My father taught me to take care of what is mine," she said. "He believed in doing things right or not at all. Sounds like a good man." Benjamin stood awkwardly near the door, clearly uncertain whether he should stay or go. "I should probably get heading back before the storm gets worse, but I want to say something first if you will hear me out." She looked up from the stove, curious. "Go ahead." "This storm is going to be bad, miss. I have lived in Montana all my life and I know the signs. You do not have enough wood here to last more than a day or two if the temperature really drops, and I am guessing you cannot cut more fast enough to keep up." He held up a hand as she opened her mouth to protest. "Not saying you could not do it eventually, but not in time to keep from freezing. My claim is not far from here. I got a good stockpile laid in, and I am heading into Butte tomorrow morning if the weather clears enough. I could bring you back a wagon load of cut wood, enough to see you through to spring." "I cannot pay you," Amelia said immediately, her pride stinging. "I have a little money saved, but I need it for supplies come spring." "Not asking for payment," Benjamin said. "Asking to help a neighbor. That is what folks do out here, or that is what they should do anyway. You can pay me back some other way when things are better, or you can pass the help along to someone else who needs it. But I cannot ride away knowing you are going to freeze for the sake of pride." Amelia stared at him, torn between gratitude and the fierce independence her father had instilled in her. She had been raised to believe that accepting charity was a weakness, that asking for help meant admitting defeat. But she had also been raised to be practical, and Benjamin was right about the storm. She could feel it in the air, that peculiar heaviness that came before the worst weather. If she ran out of fuel in the middle of a week-long blizzard, her pride would not keep her warm. "All right," she said finally, "but I will pay you back. I do not know how yet, but I will." Benjamin smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and somehow lighter. "Fair enough. You know how to use that rifle for hunting?" The question surprised her. "Of course. My father made sure I could shoot before he let me do much of anything else." "Good. Then maybe come spring you can teach me some of the tracking skills folks around here say the Garrison family is known for." "My shooting is fine, but my tracking could use work, and I heard your father was one of the best." It was a kind fiction, a way to let her feel like she was giving something of value in return, and Amelia appreciated it even as she saw through it. "Deal," she said softly. He nodded, pulling his bandana back up over his face. "I will be back tomorrow or the day after, depending on the roads. You keep that fire going and stay inside if the storm hits hard. Promise me." "I promise," Amelia said, and meant it. After Benjamin left, she stood at the window and watched him ride away into the snow until he disappeared from view. Then she turned back to her cabin, suddenly aware of how quiet it was, how the wind howling outside only emphasized the silence within. But the stove was warming up nicely. The wood Benjamin had carried would last through the night, and for the first time in months, she felt something other than loneliness and fear. She felt hope. The storm hit that night with a vengeance, just as Benjamin had predicted. Amelia woke to the sound of wind battering the cabin walls and snow piling up against the windows. She kept the fire going, rationing her wood carefully, and tried not to think about what would have happened if Benjamin had not stopped to help her. By the afternoon of the second day, the storm had intensified to the point where she could barely see the barn from the window, and she began to worry that he would not be able to make it back with the wood he had promised. But on the third morning, she woke to silence. The wind had stopped, and when she looked outside, the world was transformed into a pristine white landscape under a pale blue sky. The snow had drifted up to the windowsills in places, and she knew the road to Butte would be nearly impassable, but the storm had passed. She was outside shoveling a path to the barn when she heard the sound of wagon wheels and looked up to see Benjamin approaching, driving a heavily loaded wagon pulled by a team of 2 sturdy draft horses. The wagon bed was piled high with cut and split wood, more than she had dared to hope for, and Benjamin himself looked half frozen, his face red from the cold and ice crystals clinging to his eyebrows and the stubble on his jaw. "You made it," she called out, setting down her shovel and hurrying toward him. "Promised I would," he said, his voice hoarse. He climbed down from the wagon seat slowly, moving like everything hurt. Roads were rough but passable. "Brought you enough to last until April at least, maybe longer if we get an early spring." "You look frozen solid," Amelia said, studying his face with concern. "How long were you driving?" "Left Butte before dawn. Wanted to make sure I got here while the weather held." He started to reach for the wood, but Amelia grabbed his arm. "That can wait. You need to warm up first or you are going to lose fingers to frostbite. Come inside." He looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it, probably because he could not feel his extremities anymore. Amelia led him into the cabin and sat him down near the stove, which she had kept burning steadily since the storm began. She poured him a cup of coffee from the pot she kept warm on the stove top and pressed it into his hands, watching as he wrapped his stiff fingers around it gratefully. "Thank you," he said after a moment, his voice still rough. "That hits the spot. "You are a fool for driving in this cold," Amelia said, but there was no heat in her words. "You could have waited another day." "Could have," Benjamin agreed, "but I was worried about you. Kept thinking about you out here alone, wondering if you had enough wood, if the cabin was holding up against the wind. Guess I am not as good at minding my own business as I should be." Something in the way he said it made Amelia's heart skip. She turned away, busying herself with pouring her own cup of coffee to hide the sudden warmth in her cheeks. "Well, I appreciate it, even if it was foolish." They sat in companionable silence for a while, drinking coffee and listening to the fire crackle. Amelia found herself studying Benjamin when she thought he was not looking, noticing the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he almost smiled, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work and honest labor. He was handsome in a way that had nothing to do with refinement and everything to do with genuine character, and she felt drawn to him in a way she had not experienced before. "Can I ask you something?" Benjamin said eventually, breaking the silence. "Go ahead. Why did you stay?" "After your father passed, I mean. Most women in your position would have moved to town or gone to live with family." Amelia considered the question, trying to put into words something she barely understood herself. "This land is all I have left of my parents. My mother is buried up on that hill behind the barn, and my father is next to her. They built this life here, and it feels like giving up on them if I just walk away." She paused, then added quietly, "And I guess I am scared that if I leave I will forget who I am. Out here, I know my purpose. I might struggle with it, but I know it. In Denver or Butte or anywhere else, I would just be another poor relation, dependent on charity without any real place of my own." Benjamin nodded slowly. "I understand that. After my father died, my mother wanted to sell the farm, move into town where things would be easier. My brother James was all for it, said there was good money to be made in the mines and no point breaking our backs on land that barely produced enough to feed us. But I could not let it go. That farm was everything my father worked for, everything he wanted to pass down to us. Selling it would have felt like saying his life did not matter." "So what happened?" Amelia asked, genuinely curious. "We compromised. James moved to town, got work at the Copper King mine. I stayed on the farm but also took work at the mine to bring in steady money. The farm is not what it was when my father ran it, but it is still there, still in the family. And my mother lives with my brother and his wife in Butte, where she is comfortable and looked after." He smiled slightly. "Everyone got something they needed, even if none of us got everything we wanted. Do you ever regret it? Staying, I mean." "Sometimes," Benjamin admitted. "When the work is hard, and the money is tight, and I am wondering why I am killing myself to hold onto a piece of land that fights me every step of the way. But then I walk out in the morning and see the sun coming up over the mountains, or I sit on my father's porch and remember him sitting in the same spot, and I know I made the right choice. Some things are worth the struggle." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back quickly. "Yes," she said softly, "some things are." They finished their coffee, and then Benjamin insisted on unloading the wood despite Amelia's protests that he should rest longer. They worked together in the cold afternoon sun, carrying armload after armload of split logs to stack against the side of the cabin under the eaves where they would stay relatively dry. It was hard work, but having someone to share it with made it feel less like a burden and more like an accomplishment. When the wagon was finally empty, the sun was beginning to set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Benjamin stood looking at the stacked wood with satisfaction, his breath making clouds in the cold air. "That should hold you," he said. "You have any trouble, my place is 3 miles due north. Look for the old lightning-struck pine at the fork in the creek, My cabin is just beyond that." "I will remember," Amelia said. She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to stay for supper? It is just stew and biscuits, nothing fancy, but it is hot and there is plenty." Benjamin looked surprised, then pleased. "I would like that very much if you are sure it is no trouble." "No trouble at all," Amelia assured him. "After all you have done for me, it is the least I can offer." The stew was simple but good, made from salt pork and root vegetables from her cellar, seasoned with herbs Amelia had dried the previous summer. The biscuits were fluffy and golden, and Benjamin ate like a man who had not had a proper meal in days, which made Amelia suspect was probably true. They talked as they ate, sharing stories about their childhoods, their families, the challenges of living in Montana during the harsh winters and brief summers. Amelia learned that Benjamin was 26, that he had an older sister who had moved to California with her husband, and that his favorite thing in the world was the first coffee of the morning while watching the sunrise. Benjamin learned that Amelia had always wanted to see the ocean, that she could read Latin because her mother had been a teacher back east, and that she missed her father's laugh more than anything else about him. By the time they finished eating, full dark had fallen outside and the temperature had dropped sharply. Benjamin looked reluctant to leave, but he stood and reached for his coat anyway. "I should get going before it gets any colder," he said. "Thank you for the meal. It was the best food I've had in longer than I care to admit." "Thank you for the wood," Amelia said, "and for checking on me. It means more than you know." He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Would it be all right if I stopped by again sometime?" "Just to make sure you are doing all right." Amelia felt her heart speed up. "I would like that," she said honestly. Benjamin smiled, that full, genuine smile that changed his whole face, and nodded. "Then I will see you soon, Miss Garrison." "Amelia," she said impulsively. "You can call me Amelia." "Amelia," he repeated, testing the name. "Benjamin, then, or Ben if you prefer." "Ben," she said, and liked the way it sounded. After he left, Amelia cleaned up the supper dishes and banked the fire for the night, then lay in her bed listening to the silence and thinking about blue-gray eyes and a smile that made her feel warm despite the cold. She told herself she was being foolish, that she barely knew this man, that getting her hopes up would only lead to disappointment. But she could not quite suppress the flutter of excitement in her chest, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, her long months of loneliness were coming to an end. Ben came back 3 days later with a freshly killed deer slung over his horse. "Thought you might could use some fresh meat," he said when she opened the door. "Took him this morning, and I have more than I can use before it spoils." They spent the afternoon butchering the deer together, Amelia showing Ben the techniques her father had taught her for preserving every usable part of the animal. Ben was impressed by her skill and efficiency, and Amelia found herself enjoying the chance to demonstrate her competence, to show that she was more than just a woman struggling to survive alone. As they worked, they talked more, the conversation flowing easily now that they had begun to know each other. Ben told her about his work in the mine, the darkness and danger of going deep into the earth, the camaraderie among the miners, and the ever-present fear of cave-ins or gas explosions. Amelia told him about her plans for the homestead come spring, the garden she wanted to plant, the fence repairs that needed doing, the possibility of getting some chickens if she could afford them. "I could help with the fence repairs," Ben offered. "I am decent with carpentry, and I owe you for teaching me about butchering. Did not know half those techniques." "You do not owe me anything," Amelia protested, but she was smiling. "Then maybe I just want an excuse to come see you again," Ben said, and there was something in his voice that made Amelia's breath catch. She looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse race. For a long moment they just stared at each other, the butchered deer forgotten, the cold afternoon air forgotten, everything forgotten except the sudden electric awareness between them. Then Ben seemed to catch himself and looked away, clearing his throat. "Sorry, that was too forward of me." "No," Amelia said quickly. "It was not. I mean, I would like you to come see me again, for any reason." Ben looked back at her, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "Yeah? Yeah," Amelia confirmed softly. After that, Ben became a regular presence at the homestead. He came by every few days, always with some excuse, some offering, some reason that was not quite the real reason they both knew he was there. He helped her repair the barn roof that had been damaged in the big storm. He taught her how to set better snares for rabbits. He brought her books borrowed from his brother's collection in town, knowing how much she missed having new things to read during the long winter evenings. And Amelia, for her part, found herself watching for him, listening for the sound of his horse approaching, planning things she wanted to tell him or show him. She saved the best of her baking for his visits, made sure there was always fresh coffee ready, found herself taking more care with her appearance on days she thought he might come by. They were courting, though neither of them said the word out loud. It was a slow, careful dance. Two wounded people learning to trust again, to hope again, to believe that maybe they did not have to face the hardness of life alone. February passed into March, and the worst of the winter began to ease. The days grew longer, the sun stronger, and though snow still fell, it melted faster than it accumulated. Ben came by one afternoon in mid-March with news that made his eyes shine with excitement. "My claim came through," he said, almost before he was through the door. "The one I filed last fall, up in the hills north of my place. The assayer's report came back and there is silver there, Amelia. Real silver, not just traces. If I can work it right, if I can get the capital together to really dig into it, it could be significant." Amelia felt her heart swell with genuine happiness for him. "Ben, that is wonderful. That is what you have been hoping for." "It is," he agreed, but some of his excitement had faded, replaced by something more complex. "But it also means decisions. Working the claim properly means I cannot keep my job at the Copper King. It means investing everything I have and probably borrowing on top of that. It means risk." "You are scared," Amelia observed gently. "Terrified," Ben admitted. "What if I am wrong? What if the silver runs out after a few feet? What if I put everything into this and lose it all?" Amelia moved closer to him, reached out and took his hand. It was the first time they had really touched beyond the accidental brush of fingers, and she felt the warmth of his skin, the strength in his grip as his fingers closed around hers. "What if you are right?" she countered. "What if there is enough silver there to change everything? You said yourself that some things are worth the struggle. Is this one of them?" Ben looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. "It could be. If I make this work, if the claim pays out even half as much as I hope, I could build something real. A future. Security." He paused, then added quietly, "Something to offer someone." The implication hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Amelia felt her cheeks warm, but she did not look away. "Then I think you should do it," she said. "I think you should take the risk. Even knowing I will have less time to come by here. That I will be working the claim from dawn to dusk, at least at first. Even knowing that," Amelia said, though her heart sank at the thought of seeing him less often. "Because it is your dream, Ben, and dreams are worth fighting for." He studied her face for a long moment, then lifted his free hand and gently cupped her cheek. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was tender, and Amelia felt herself lean into it almost without conscious thought. "You are remarkable," Ben said softly. Do you know that?" Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her, gentle and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Amelia had no desire to pull away. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him back, pouring into it all the loneliness and hope and affection that had been building in her for months. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Ben rested his forehead against hers and laughed quietly. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he confessed. "Only weeks," Amelia teased. "I've been thinking about it since that first day when you carried my firewood home." "Well then," Ben said, his eyes dancing with happiness and mischief, "I guess I should have been bolder sooner." He kissed her again, longer this time, and Amelia felt something that had been frozen inside her since her father's death begin to thaw and warm and come back to life. This was what she had been missing, she realized. Not just help with the physical labor of survival, but this connection, this partnership, this sense of being truly seen and valued by another person. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. Ben would file the final paperwork on the claim and give notice at the mine. He would need to hire help eventually, but at first he would do as much of the work himself as he could to save money. Amelia offered to help where she could, bringing him meals when he was working, helping with the washing and mending that he would not have time for. It was not much, but it was what she could offer, and Ben accepted with gratitude. As March turned to April and the snow finally began its true retreat, revealing the brown earth beneath, Ben threw himself into working his claim with single-minded determination. He still came by the homestead, but less frequently, and when he did, he was often exhausted, his hands blistered and his body aching. But there was a light in his eyes that had not been there before, a sense of purpose and possibility that made even the hardest days worthwhile. Amelia, meanwhile, began the work of spring planting, turning over the earth in her small garden plot and putting in seeds for vegetables and herbs. The physical labor was demanding, but she was stronger now than she had been in the fall, hardened by her winter of survival, and she found satisfaction in the work. One evening in late April, Ben showed up at her door just as the sun was setting, covered in rock dust and grinning like a madman. "I hit the vein," he said without preamble. "The main vein, Amelia. It is wide and it is rich and it goes back as far as I can see." Amelia shrieked with delight and threw her arms around him, not caring about the dust that transferred to her dress. "That is incredible. Oh, Ben, I am so proud of you." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and when he set her down, he kissed her with a passion and joy that took her breath away. "This changes everything," he said when they finally came up for air. "With this silver, I can expand operations, hire help, really build something substantial. I can pay off my debts and have capital to invest. I can build a proper house, not just a cabin. I can offer a real future." "You already offer a real future," Amelia said, cupping his face in her hands. "This just makes it a bit more comfortable." Ben caught her hands and held them, his expression turning serious. "Amelia Garrison, I know this is fast, and I know we have only known each other a few months, but I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You are strong and smart and brave and beautiful, and every day I spend away from you feels like a waste. I want to build this future with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to face whatever comes together instead of alone." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" Amelia felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears, joyful tears, tears of relief and love and the incredible rightness of this moment. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Yes, Ben, I will marry you." They were married on a clear day in May at the small church in Butt. With Ben's family, and a few of Amelia's father's old friends in attendance. Amelia wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk for all these years, and Ben wore a new suit that his sister had sent from California. They spoke their vows with voices that shook with emotion, promising to love and honor each other through all the challenges and joys that life would bring. After the ceremony, they returned to Ben's homestead, which would now be their home. True to his word, Ben had begun construction on a larger house to replace his small cabin, and though it was not yet finished, the frame stood strong and promising on a rise overlooking the creek. They spent their first night as husband and wife in the old cabin, lying together in Ben's narrow bed and talking about their dreams for the future, until they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. The months that followed were full of hard work, but also deep contentment. Amelia moved her belongings from her father's homestead to Ben's property, though they kept the old cabin maintained for use as a guest house or storage. Ben's silver claim continued to produce, and by summer's end, he had hired 3 men to help with the mining operation, which meant he could spend more time on other aspects of building their life together. The new house was completed in September, a sturdy 2-story structure with real glass windows, a large kitchen, and a bedroom upstairs that caught the morning sun. Amelia planted flowers around the porch and hung curtains she had sewn herself, making the place feel like home. They got chickens, as Amelia had hoped, and a milk cow, and Ben talked about maybe getting some cattle come spring. Their first winter together was nothing like the harsh, lonely winter that had preceded it. When the snow fell and the wind howled, Amelia was warm and safe with Ben beside her, and the woodpile he had stacked never seemed to diminish no matter how much they burned. They spent the long evenings reading aloud to each other, playing cards, making love, and talking about everything and nothing. In February, just about a year after that first meeting in the snow, Amelia realized she was pregnant. She told Ben on a Sunday morning over breakfast, watching as the news registered on his face and transformed into pure joy. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break, and she felt his tears wet on her neck as he whispered "thank you" over and over. Their son was born in October of 1885, a healthy baby with Ben's dark hair and Amelia's green eyes. They named him Thomas, after Ben's father, and from the moment he drew his first breath and let out a lusty cry, he became the center of their world. Ben was a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with Thomas when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his rough voice that somehow always settled the baby. Amelia had worried that motherhood might feel like a cage, might make her miss her independence and freedom, but instead, she found it expanded her world in ways she had not anticipated. Watching Ben with their son, seeing the gentleness and love he showed this tiny person, made her fall in love with her husband all over again. And holding Thomas, feeling the weight and warmth of him in her arms, gave her a sense of purpose and connection that was different from but equally valuable as anything else she had experienced. The silver claim continued to produce well, and by the spring of 1886, Ben was able to purchase the adjacent property, expanding their holdings significantly. He talked about transitioning from mining to ranching, using the capital from the silver to build a cattle operation that could sustain them long after the silver ran out. Amelia supported the plan, helping him research breeds and management techniques, using her father's knowledge of the land to identify the best pastures and water sources. In the summer of 1887, their daughter was born, a tiny thing they named Clara after Amelia's mother. She was quieter than Thomas had been, watchful and calm even as an infant, and she had Ben's blue-gray eyes and a stubborn streak that showed itself early and often. Thomas, now nearly 2, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and occasionally trying to share his toys by placing them directly on her head. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of seasons passing and children growing. The ranch thrived under Ben's management, and by 1890 they had a herd of 200 cattle and employed 4 full-time hands. Amelia managed the household and gardens, preserved food for the winter, taught Thomas and Clara their letters and numbers, and served as the unofficial medic for the ranch, treating minor injuries and illnesses with skills she had learned from her mother and expanded through study and practice. In 1892, Amelia's old homestead, which they had been renting to a young couple, became vacant when the couple decided to move to Oregon. Ben and Amelia discussed selling it, but in the end, Amelia could not bring herself to let it go. Instead, they converted it into a school, hiring a teacher and opening it to the children of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. It was Amelia's way of honoring her mother's legacy as an educator, and watching children learn and grow in the house her father had built brought her a special kind of joy. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the cattle and the land, who followed his father everywhere and absorbed knowledge like a sponge. Clara was wild and free, more likely to be found climbing trees or riding her pony at breakneck speed than sitting quietly with her embroidery. They fought like cats and dogs sometimes, but they also had each other's backs fiercely, and watching them together made Ben and Amelia grateful for the family they had built. In 1895, when Thomas was 10 and Clara was 8, Amelia gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Rose. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth even more so, and afterward the doctor told Amelia there should be no more children. She mourned the loss of future possibilities, but she was also grateful for the 4 healthy children she had, for the family that filled her house with noise and life and love. The twins were a handful from the start, feeding off each other's energy and getting into twice the trouble in half the time. But they were also affectionate and funny, and they brought a new lightness to the family. Thomas and Clara rose to the challenge of helping with the babies, and Amelia marveled at how her older children had grown into capable, caring people. As the century turned and the children grew older, Ben and Amelia found themselves settling into a comfortable middle age. Ben's hair had gone gray at the temples, and Amelia had laugh lines around her eyes and mouth, but they still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other goodbye every morning, still found excuses to steal moments alone together. In the spring of 1900, as they sat on the porch of the house they had built together, watching the sun set over land they had made their own, Ben reached over and took Amelia's hand. "You ever think about that day in the snow?" he asked. "When I found you gathering firewood?" "All the time," Amelia admitted. "I think about how close I came to refusing your help, to sending you away out of pride, and I wonder what my life would have been like if I had." "Colder," Ben said with a slight smile, "and lonelier." "Yes," Amelia agreed, "so much lonelier. I did not realize how much I needed someone until you showed me what it could be like to not be alone." Ben lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I saw you out there, this fierce, stubborn woman determined to survive against all odds, and I knew I had to know you. Had to help you if you would let me. I told myself it was just being neighborly, but even then I think I knew it was more than that." "Love at first sight," Amelia teased. "Maybe not love," Ben said thoughtfully, "but recognition. Like my soul knew yours and was just waiting for my head and heart to catch up." He paused, then added, "I love you, Amelia Edwards. I have loved you since before I had a name for the feeling, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." Amelia felt tears gather in her eyes, the good kind that came from being overwhelmed by emotion. "I love you too," she said. "You saved me that day in more ways than just carrying my firewood. You gave me back a reason to hope, to dream, to believe that I could have more than just survival." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear. From inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their children, Thomas and Clara helping the twins with their homework, laughter and occasional bickering, the ordinary noise of family life. "We built something good here," Ben said eventually. "We did," Amelia agreed. "Something worth every struggle it took to get here." As spring turned to summer and their 16th anniversary approached, Ben and Amelia planned a celebration. It would be small, just family and close friends, but it felt important to mark the years and the life they had created together. The children were excited, planning surprises and special treats, and the house buzzed with happy anticipation. On the day itself, a clear June morning, Amelia woke to find Ben already up, standing at the window and looking out over their land. She slipped out of bed and joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "Could not sleep?" she asked. "Woke up grateful," Ben said simply. "Lying there thinking about everything we have, everything we have been through together, and I was just so grateful I could not contain it." Amelia rested her cheek against his back, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I know what you mean. Sometimes it feels like too much good fortune, like I should not be allowed to be this happy." Ben turned in her arms and pulled her close. "You deserve every bit of happiness and more. You have worked for it, earned it, fought for it. We both have." They stood there holding each other as the sun rose higher, and Amelia thought about that girl in the snow, struggling alone, convinced she had to do everything herself or die trying. She was grateful to that girl for her strength and stubbornness, but she was also grateful that she had learned to accept help, to open her heart, to trust in the possibility of partnership and love. The anniversary celebration was everything they had hoped, full of laughter and good food and the warm presence of people they cared about. Thomas gave a surprisingly eloquent toast for a 16-year-old, talking about how his parents had shown him what real love looked like, how their partnership was the model he hoped to emulate in his own life someday. Clara presented them with a painting she had done of their house and the mountains behind it, capturing the beauty of their home with a skill that surprised everyone. The twins performed a slightly chaotic but enthusiastic song they had composed for the occasion, and by the end, there was not a dry eye in the house. That night, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, Ben and Amelia sat together on the porch as they had so many times before. The night was warm, the stars were bright, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. 16 years, Ben mused. Feels like both forever and no time at all. "I hope we get at least 16 more," Amelia said. "At least," Ben agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you ever regret it? Staying in Montana, I mean. You could have had an easier life somewhere else, with more comforts and fewer hardships." Amelia considered the question seriously. It was true that their life had not been easy. There had been years when the cattle prices were low and money was tight, years when drought or disease or harsh weather had tested them to their limits. There had been sleepless nights with sick children, accidents that could have been tragedies, moments of doubt and fear and exhaustion. But there had also been mornings watching the sunrise over the mountains with the man she loved. There had been the first time Thomas successfully roped a calf, the sound of Clara's laughter echoing through the house, the warmth of the twins curled up on either side of her as she read them stories. There had been quiet evenings and passionate nights, hard-won successes and the deep satisfaction of building something lasting. "No," she said finally. "I do not regret it. This life, this place, you and our children, this is exactly where I was meant to be. Everything I went through, all the struggles and losses, they led me here, led me to you. I would not change any of it." Ben pulled her closer, and she felt his lips brush her temple. "Good," he said softly, "because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Amelia Edwards. As the years continued to pass, their family continued to grow and change. Thomas, at 18, met and fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sensible girl named Margaret who loved the land as much as he did. They were married in 1903, and by 1905 they had given Ben and Amelia their first grandchild, a boy they named Benjamin after his grandfather. Clara, to no one's surprise, took a less conventional path. She became a skilled horse trainer, developing a reputation throughout Montana for her ability to work with even the most difficult animals. She showed no interest in settling down, much to the frustration of several young men who tried to court her, and Amelia and Ben supported her independence, remembering their own unconventional beginning. The twins grew up close as siblings could be, but as they reached their teenage years, their paths began to diverge. Daniel was fascinated by engineering and machinery, spending hours tinkering with anything mechanical he could get his hands on. Rose, meanwhile, showed a talent for music, playing the piano and singing with a voice that could make grown men weep. Ben and Amelia encouraged both their interests, believing that their children should pursue their own dreams, wherever those dreams might lead. In 1908, Clara finally met her match in the form of a wildlife photographer from back east who had come to Montana to document the changing frontier. His name was Samuel, and he was as unconventional as Clara herself, willing to sleep under the stars and ride for days to get the perfect shot. They were married in a simple ceremony under the open sky, and afterward, they split their time between Montana and travels throughout the West, documenting the landscapes and wildlife with Clara's knowledge of the land and Samuel's artistic eye. The twins left for college in 1913, Daniel to study engineering in Chicago and Rose to attend a music conservatory in Boston. The house felt empty with them gone, and Amelia found herself at loose ends for the first time in decades. But Ben, ever attentive, suggested they take a trip, something they had never done in all their years together. "Where would you want to go?" he asked her one evening. Amelia thought back to that conversation so many years ago when she had told him about her dreams. "The ocean," she said. "I have always wanted to see the ocean." So in the fall of 1913, they took the train to California, visiting Ben's sister and her family, and then continuing on to the coast. When Amelia finally stood on the beach and looked out at the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, she felt something settle in her soul. Ben stood beside her, holding her hand, and together they watched the waves roll in and out, constant and eternal. "Was it worth the wait?" Ben asked. "Yes," Amelia said. "Though I think it means more now than it would have when I was young. Now I can appreciate it not just for what it is, but for what it represents. Dreams do come true, Ben. Maybe not always in the way we expect or on the timeline we imagine, but they do come true." They returned to Montana renewed and refreshed, ready to enjoy this new phase of their life. Thomas was managing most of the ranch operations now, which gave Ben more time to pursue other interests. He began mentoring young miners and ranchers, passing on the knowledge he had accumulated over decades. Amelia expanded the school that operated out of her old homestead, adding more grades and another teacher. and she took satisfaction in knowing that children in their community had access to education because of the foundation she and Ben had built. In 1918, as the world was emerging from the devastation of the Great War, the family gathered to celebrate Ben and Amelia's 33rd anniversary. All 4 of their children were there, along with their spouses and the growing number of grandchildren. Thomas and Margaret now had 4 children of their own. Clara and Samuel had twin daughters who were as wild and free as their mother. Daniel had married a fellow engineer and they had a son. Rose had married a composer and they had just welcomed their first child, a daughter. Looking around at the gathering, at the faces of the family they had created, Amelia felt overwhelmed with gratitude. From that single act of kindness on a snowy day in 1884, from Ben carrying her firewood home, had grown this entire world of love and connection and life. Ben found her standing alone for a moment, watching the children play in the yard while the adults talked and laughed on the porch. He slipped his arm around her waist, comfortable and familiar after all these years. "Quite a crowd, is it not?" he said. "Our crowd," Amelia replied. "Our family. Sometimes I still cannot quite believe it is real." "It is real," Ben assured her. "Every bit of it. Every moment of joy and struggle, every child and grandchild, every year we have had together. All real, all earned, all ours." That evening, as the celebration wound down and their children and grandchildren prepared to head home or to bed, Thomas called for everyone's attention. He stood with his wife and children, looking slightly nervous but also determined. "Dad, Mom, we wanted to do something special for your anniversary," he said. "You two have built something incredible here, not just the ranch but the family, the community, the legacy. And we wanted to make sure that legacy continues." He pulled out a document and handed it to Ben. "We have been talking, all of us kids, and we want to officially name this place. We are calling it the Garrison Edwards Ranch, honoring both of your families, both of your contributions. And we have drawn up papers making it a family trust, so it will stay in the family for generations to come." Ben looked down at the document, then up at his children, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "This is too much," he managed to say. "It is not enough," Clara said firmly. "You gave us everything. This is just our way of saying thank you and of making sure what you built continues." Amelia felt tears running down her cheeks, but she was smiling through them. "Thank you," she said to her children. "All of you. This means more than you know." As the family embraced and celebrated this new chapter, Amelia caught Ben's eye across the room. He smiled at her, that same smile that had captivated her 34 years ago, and she smiled back, letting all her love and gratitude show on her face. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all years do. They lost Ben's mother in 1920, and James followed 2 years later. But there were also new grandchildren, new achievements, new reasons to celebrate. Daniel's engineering firm became successful, working on major projects throughout the Midwest. Rose performed in concert halls across the country, her beautiful voice bringing joy to thousands. Clara and Samuel published books of photographs and essays about the changing West, preserving a way of life that was rapidly disappearing. And Thomas continued to expand and improve the ranch, implementing new techniques and building on the foundation his parents had laid. In 1925, Ben and Amelia celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by their children, 16 grandchildren, and even 2 great-grandchildren from Thomas's oldest son. They were in their 60s now, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but their love for each other had only deepened with time. 40 years, Ben said, echoing his words from so many other anniversaries. "Hard to believe. Best 40 years of my life," Amelia said. even the difficult parts, because we face them together. Here is to 40 more, Ben said, raising his glass. I will settle for whatever time we are given, Amelia replied, as long as we are together. They did not get 40 more years, but they did get another decade. Ben passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1935, at the age of 76. Amelia woke to find him gone, his hand still warm in hers, a slight smile on his face, as if he had seen something beautiful in his final moments. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. But Amelia was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, all of whom had loved Ben and who helped her through those first terrible days. At the funeral, which was attended by what seemed like half of Montana, person after person stood to speak about Ben's kindness, his integrity, his generosity. He had touched so many lives, helped so many people, and the outpouring of love and respect was a testament to the man he had been. Amelia lived another 12 years, spending them surrounded by family on the ranch she and Ben had built together. She taught her grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the old days, about Montana before it was fully settled, about the hardships and joys of frontier life. She told them about their grandfather, about his strength and gentleness, about the day he had carried her firewood home through the snow and changed both their lives forever. When she passed away in 1947, at the age of 83, she was laid to rest beside Ben on the hill overlooking the ranch, the same hill where her parents were buried. The family gathered once more, 4 generations strong, to say goodbye to the woman who had been the heart of their family. But Amelia's and Ben's legacy lived on. The Garrison Edwards Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations just as they had planned. The school Amelia had founded grew into a full elementary school, educating hundreds of children over the decades. And the story of the cowboy who carried firewood home for a struggling young woman, and the love that grew from that simple act of kindness, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of how love can grow from the smallest seeds when tended with care and commitment. Decades later, great-great-grandchildren would visit the old ranch house, now preserved as part of the family compound, and see the portrait of Ben and Amelia that hung in the main room. In it, they were middle-aged, standing together in front of their home, Ben's hand on Amelia's shoulder and both of them smiling. And in their eyes, clearly visible even in the old photograph, was a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger, a love that had started with firewood in the snow and had built an empire of family and legacy. That was the story the children heard, the story of how a simple act of kindness on a cold winter day had changed everything, of how 2 people who had every reason to remain alone had found each other and built a life together that outlasted them both. It was a story about hope and love, about the courage to accept help and the wisdom to offer it, about the fact that the smallest choices can have the greatest consequences. And on winter days when the snow fell heavy in Montana, when the wind howled and the temperature dropped, someone in the family would always look out the window and think about Amelia gathering firewood all those years ago, about Ben stopping to help, and about all the joy and life and love that had flowed from that single moment. They would think about it and smile, grateful for the legacy they had inherited, grateful for the reminder that kindness matters, that love endures, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest acts of human compassion. The ranch itself stood as a monument to Ben and Amelia's love, still operating well into the 21st century, still in family hands, still teaching each new generation the values that had built it. Hard work, integrity, compassion, and the understanding that we are all stronger together than we are alone. The land they had fought to keep, the home they had built, the family they had raised, all of it continued, a living testament to two people who had found each other in the snow and had chosen, every day for 40 years, to keep choosing each other, to keep building together, to keep loving through every challenge and every joy. And that, in the end, was the truest legacy of all.